Okay, I think we'll get started. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening.
Bienvenidos, gracias por venir.
I'm thrilled to be here with you
Estoy
tonight.
encantada de estar aquí con ustedes esta noche.
One moment, I think we're experiencing a technical issue.
Okay.
Un momento, por favor.
Spanish interpreter 1. There's someone in the channel doing the simultaneous right now. I will add you to the channel after the second slide, but we only need you to read to the second slide.
Okay, very well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, are we good to go?
Yes, we are.
Okay, great. So I'm thrilled to be here with you this evening. I would first like to ask if anyone needs interpretations at this meeting. If you could please go to the next slide. Please click on the interpretation icon for Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese to hear a simultaneous interpretation of the session. During the question and answer, staff will be available to provide language assistance for Spanish, Mandarin, and Cantonese speakers as needed. Spanish, Mandarin, or Cantonese speaking participants may also contact us for additional assistance.
Al icono de interpretación, ya sea en español.
Can you hold 1 second for the Spanish interpretation? May also contact us for additional assistance via email at dcpcityofyes_dl@planning.nyc.gov. Now that I'll ask the Spanish interpreter to read the following, and then the other interpreters to step in after.
Sí, muy buenas tardes. Por favor, dele clic al icono de interpretación en español para poder escuchar la interpretación de manera simultánea de esta sesión durante el periodo de preguntas y respuestas. El personal va a estar disponible para darle asistencia en el lenguaje del idioma español. Todos los participantes, por favor, si necesitan asistencia adicional, pueden contactarse a través del correo electrónico que aparece en pantalla, que es dcpcityofyes, @planning.nyz.gov. Okay.
The next interpreter, please share.
请我们的需要我们翻译的人员需要同心翻译的人员，请按图示下面有个地球的这个按钮收听国语翻译，同心传译。在提问的环节 Q&A 上面呢，我们工作人员呢也是会提供西班牙语、普通话还有粤语的翻译帮助的。如果需要去帮助的话呢，也是可以用我们的电子邮件方式 dcpcityofyes_ 这个底线 dl@planning.nyc.com 和.gov 和我们取得联系。谢谢。Thank you for this is the end of the Mandarin announcement.
Thank you. Cantonese interpreter.
如果確係需要有粵語嘅翻譯嘅話，請按著喺右下角有個地球嘅圖標，咁我哋工作人員會安排你收聽粵語嘅翻譯㗎啦。如果係你有想發問咧，我哋工作人員亦都會根據你喺用以下呢個 email address 嗰度提出你個問題，亦都可以我哋會提出你個支援。嗰個 email address 係 city of yes _ dl@planning.nyc.gov. This is the end of Cantonese interpretation.
Thank you so much. So before we get started with our presentation, we're very excited to have Dan Gorodnick, the chair of the City Planning Commission and director of Department of City Planning, here with us tonight, and he'll offer an overview of the city of Yes. Dan?
Thanks, Lara. Good evening, everybody. I'm Dan Gorodnick, director of the Department of City Planning and chair of the City Planning Commission. Thank you so much for joining us. Happy Simchat Torah to all who celebrate it. We intend to have a second public information session on Thursday, October 27th, for those who can't join us tonight. To all of you who are here this evening, thanks for joining us to talk about our City of Yes initiatives. As Mayor Adams said when he announced the City of Yes in June, these proposals focused on economic recovery, affordable housing, and sustainability will remove red tape for businesses, expand housing opportunities in every neighborhood, and accelerate the transition to our energy future. New Yorkers are not going to wait around while other cities and other countries sprint towards a post-pandemic world, and now we won't have to. These proposals are critical to our future. As we face three simultaneous crises, the climate crisis, the economic impact of COVID, and a housing crisis, we need to say yes to greener buildings, yes to jobs, and yes to more housing in all of our communities. And to get them right, we need guidance from you as we draft these proposals. You may know that New York City's buildings are responsible for 70% of our carbon footprint. City of Yes for carbon neutrality is a vital part in a broader strategy to use green power to light, heat, and cool our homes and offices. Through these zoning changes, we can make it easier to install solar panels, improve energy storage, and clear the way for efficient energy retrofits. For example, today, we generate about 300 megawatts of energy through rooftop solar panels every day. By removing zoning barriers to solar panels on buildings, City of Yes would more than triple the amount of energy New York City can generate through solar panels over the next 8 years to 1,000 megawatts. That additional energy is enough to power over 70,000 homes. Our carbon neutrality work is much more expansive than just solar panels, of course, but they are an example of how we can get to a healthier, more sustainable city. City of Yes for economic opportunity will help small businesses across the city to open, grow, and thrive. For example, City of Yes would create the largest expansion of space available for small-scale production in more than 60 years by allowing small producers like art studios, food manufacturers, apparel makers, and woodworking shops to locate and grow in commercial corridors for the first time without additional zoning approvals. This is long overdue, and it will help to fill our vacant storefronts. Finally, like our reforms to make New York City greener and those to support small businesses, we are working to increase the number of homes in New York City, including income-restricted homes. To do that, we need to expand and diversify the type of housing we permit in many of our neighborhoods across the city, and City of Yes seeks to do just that. Today, for example, we allow buildings to be slightly bigger when they offer income-restricted housing for New York City seniors. Our housing initiative would give the same benefit to those who include other types of income-restricted housing, including supportive housing. We need to make it easier to deliver affordable housing as of right. And this move alone could create capacity for tens of thousands of new affordable homes in high and mid-density districts. We're also looking to put people before parking by strategically reducing excessive parking requirements. This too would unlock the potential for tens of thousands of more homes. Tonight's gathering is just the start of our public engagement process on the City of Yes zoning initiatives. We are trying to move away from a model of presenting a final product and just asking for your support. We are shaping these plans in real time. And as we build these proposals, we are looking forward to hearing from you. We will have details on more upcoming public information sessions available in the near future at nyc.gov/engage. I just want to give a really big thanks to the Department of City Planning team, those who you will see on the screen tonight, those behind the scenes, for all of the work that they did to make this evening a success, and everything that they do on a daily basis on behalf of the city. We appreciate you very much. Back to you, Lara. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan, so much. We appreciate your important comment there. If you can go to the next slide. Before we dive in, a few housekeeping notes. We will start with a presentation and then dedicate the rest of the time to answering your questions. To sign into the meeting, the instructions to speak are as follow. For those of you who attended a DCP info session before, tonight's will run very similarly to those. During the presentation, if a question comes to mind, you can submit it by using the Q&A code. If you can go to the next slide, please. You can use the Q&A, the question and answer feature. Staff will collect questions and queue them up for the live Q&A session. Once we start the live Q&A portion of the event, you will then have two options to ask a question. You can continue submitting written questions, or you can raise your hand. If you're using your phone to listen in, you will press *9 to raise your hand. When your name is called, you will be able to use the buttons at the bottom left corner of your Zoom screen to unmute yourself and turn on your camera if you would like. If you're joining us by phone, I will give further instructions at the end of the presentation on how to unmute. We will alternate between written questions and those who want to ask questions verbally. Before we get started, if you could go to the next slide. I just wanted to put up a list of the Department of City Planning City of Yes text amendment teams. As you can see here, it's a pretty robust team that are leading this, but we have a very robust team behind, as Dan had mentioned as well. And so before we get started, we do have a few elected officials in the room that I would like to invite to say a few words. Manhattan Borough President Levine, are you online?
I sure am. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Great. I apologize for the weird setting. I'm out in the street, as you can see, between events. But I did just want to hop on very briefly to speak for a minute about why I think this is an important set of proposals. I want to thank Commissioner Gorodnick for leading on this, for his vision on this, and also for this process of opening up to community conversation very early before we're in ULURP. I think that's really helpful so that we get this right. And I'll tell you why I think this is so important. There are too many times where I talk to partners who want to advance important projects in Manhattan to create supportive housing, to install green infrastructure, to start a small business. And the existing zoning codes are an impediment. And the truth is that if you're advancing a project which is good for the city, because of various goals we're talking about tonight, the zoning code should enable you to move forward. It shouldn't be an obstacle. That's clearly true when it comes to green technology. And there are too many impediments now for installing solar panels, installing wind power, more advanced power storage facilities. The zoning code needs to be updated to enable that kind of green infrastructure in our buildings. The same is often true for small business, where I talk to folks who have small manufacturers, small producers. They want to repurpose existing space, and it's just too hard. We should smooth the way for those kinds of small businesses. And the proposals that we're hearing about today would do that. And my goodness, on the imperative of creating more affordable, supportive, senior housing. We need to do everything possible to facilitate that. And of course, one of the policy components does that. I certainly applaud the idea of removing burdensome parking requirements. We want that space to be used for affordability. There's a lot here that I'm excited about. And of course, again, this is the beginning of the process. We have a chance now for the public to scrutinize this, to offer their input, and that's all for the good. So thank you again, Commissioner Garodnick, for putting forth these proposals. I'm excited for the process to play out. Thank you for allowing me to step on. I'm going to wrap up now because I know I'm in a weird setting, but thanks for allowing me to speak at the beginning of this program. Thanks so much, everybody.
Really appreciate you joining us, Borough President. If we can go back to the presentation. We also have a video from Queensborough President Donovan Richards, who wasn't able to attend tonight, but wanted to offer some comments.
Good evening, New York City. My name is Donovan Richards, and I am the Queensborough President. I am proud to give opening remarks for this program tonight and have to thank my good friend, Commissioner Dan Garodnick, for asking me to do so. As a former Subcommittee on Zoning and Franchises Chair, I've seen many citywide zoning text amendments and zoning actions come my way. I truly commend the work that the Department of City Planning is doing with these 3 new text amendments. With Queens looking in the rearview mirror at our worst days of COVID-19, I'm happy to see the city's response to building up our local businesses, actively fighting climate change, and ensuring we have more affordable housing for the next several decades. Our city needs to heal, and zoning is a tool to help us do just that. These amendments have the potential to correct outdated rules and change the fabric of New York for the better. Now look, I realize zoning language is never the flashiest or most exciting, but I think you'll find tonight's info session has been written with case studies and examples that will help you understand its impact. I encourage everyone to listen and to speak up. As a proponent for community engagement, I want to make sure no stone goes unturned as we look to the future of development throughout the 5 boroughs. I'm not saying I want us to be here all night though, but I want everyone to feel and know that their opinion matters and that we are here to listen. And of course, my office doors are always open. You can reach out to my planning and development team if you have any questions throughout this process. My planning director, Vicki Garvey, will put her contact information in the chat. And if you need any assistance with planning related questions after this session, her doors will always be open. Thanks everyone, and have a great evening, and most importantly, learn as much as you can.
Thank you for sharing that video. If you can go to the next slide. So after those incredible remarks about the city of yes, we are here to learn from each other, to hear from each other, and think about what are the things that are important as we develop these proposals. With that said, I'm going to jump into the PowerPoint and I think we may have Councilmember Parina Sanchez. Are you present, Councilmember?
Hello, yes, I am.
Hi, so good to see you.
Hello, can you see me and hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. No, I am similarly, although in a different part of the city as Manhattan Borough President Levine. I'm in the South Bronx. And I also just wanted to, well, actually, I'm hopping in just to listen to the presentation. This is so important. Yeah, I guess I'm in the dark and y'all can't really see me. Sorry. How's that? Hey, there you go. Okay. So I just wanted to say hello to everyone and thank DCP for the same as Manhattan Borough President Levine has said. This is an important conversation, and these proposals are going to go through extensive public review processes, discussions in community boards, in the city council, borough presidents. But the earlier that we start these conversations, the better. And for me, you know, I'm the chair of the New York City Council's Committee on Housing and Buildings. I'm a member of the New York City Council's Committee on Land Use. And for me, this is extremely important. As a city, we need to do anything and everything that we can to make building affordable housing easier and faster and just more of a likely event. And we hear over and over from those that are in the industry that are responsible, right, that are doing the construction and the building about how difficult it is to build this housing. So I just want to applaud the administration for leading on this point. I look forward to your partnership. I'm sure there will be very colorful discussions on all of these proposals. You know, all of these City of Yes proposals, but I think, you know, just categorically, it's a critical discussion to be had. How can we make it easier to build affordable housing in the city of New York? How to spur economic development and how to get to zero carbon? And there's no better time to do it than right in the beginning. So thank you so much, DCP, and I'll be listening here and excited to see what folks have to ask during this presentation.
Thank you so much for being here, council member. We appreciate you. Okay, so now we're going to move into the presentation. We're going to start with Nihilus. Are you on?
I am here.
Great. So if we can unpin Purina, Councilmember Sanchez, please.
We have.
Okay. So I'm going to turn it over to start the presentation. We will have about a 20 to 30-minute presentation and then open it up to questions. And remember, you can put questions into the Q&A function right now, or as you are thinking, as you're watching the video, you can, or watching the presentation, you can add them too. I'll send it over to you, Nihilus.
Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone. My name is Nihilus Klingel. I'm a planner in the department's zoning division, and I am leading our research on how zoning can support our city's climate goals, specifically achieving carbon neutrality. And I'm very excited to be sharing some of this research with you tonight. Next slide. First, I want to take a minute to frame our conversation tonight. Why are we even talking about carbon in the first place? It's important to emphasize that we're facing a climate emergency, and it's largely fueled by global carbon dioxide emissions. Carbon dioxide makes up the vast majority of the United States' greenhouse gas emissions, 80% in 2019. And carbon dioxide generally comes from human activity, specifically the combustion of fossil fuels like diesel, gasoline, natural gas, and home heating oil. In 2016, the world community joined together to sign the Paris Agreement, a vision to curtail human greenhouse gas emissions in order to limit overall global warming to 2 degrees Celsius, and thus prevent further environmental damage associated with climate change. Here in New York City, we've been implementing this vision through a number of initiatives under the umbrella of achieving carbon neutrality by reducing the city's emissions 80% by 2050, or 80 by 50 for short. Next slide. So what do we mean when we talk about a carbon neutral city? It's a city in which we focused on reducing operational carbon emissions in line with the goals of the Paris Agreement. It's a city where we've reduced our overall energy needs. And to do this, we'll need to retrofit almost every building in the city to become highly efficient to reduce wasted energy. It's a city where we've cleaned the grid. And to do this, we'll need to switch from a fossil fuel powered electricity to renewables like solar and wind. And it's a city where we've electrified all remaining energy needs. That includes our vehicles and our buildings as well. This means moving away from fossil fuel fired furnaces and boilers to newer electrically powered technologies like heating and cooling, namely heat pumps. As you can see in the chart, the key driver for our city's carbon emissions by far is our building sector. And there's a big relationship between our buildings and the zoning laws that govern them. Next slide. So when it comes to our research, we're building on a strong foundation here at City Planning. 10 years ago, in 2012, the department issued Zone Green, the first comprehensive overhaul of our zoning regulations to support emerging green technologies like rooftop wind and solar. We were tipping our toe in the water, but we could have gone further. In some ways, you can think of the research that we're presenting tonight as a sort of follow-up to Zone Green. It's a chance to revisit it after 10 years, to update it, and to adjust it in light of many of the technological and legal changes that have come since. These include, since 2016, focus on decarbonization specifically, coming from the Paris Agreement and 80 by 50. These also include feedback from architects, engineers, advocates about issues they've identified and ideas they have for improvements, as exemplified here in this slide by this report from the Urban Green Council called Zone Greener. This also includes updating the zoning to reflect the Climate Mobilization Act at the city level, particularly Local Law 97, which will impose strict fines on large buildings which do not reduce their carbon emissions, as well as the CLCPA at the state level, which in particular set ambitious solar and energy storage goals for the city.
Nicholas, can we pause for one moment?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. Thank you.
Not a problem. Should I turn video back on?
No, please don't.
Okay. So this leads us to, next slide, please. This leads us to this project, Zoning for Carbon Neutrality. As a citywide text amendment, it will have the ability to positively affect every zoning district type across the city, every community district, and every borough. We're focused mainly on removing obstacles. There are so many challenges home and building owners are facing in responding to our climate emergency. And we are busy analyzing our zoning regulations to ensure that zoning isn't one of the things holding people back from making climate smart investments. To a lesser extent, we're also taking a look at incentives, particularly existing incentives, to make sure they continue to work into the future. For example, aligning our existing incentives with the way that the new New York City Energy Code works and will work in successive updates into the future. And finally, we're taking a particularly close look at solar and energy storage. And that's in response to the city and state's ambitious goals for these technologies along time horizons that are much sooner than 2050. For instance, New York City's goal is to have 1,000 megawatts of solar installed by 2030. Current estimates have us at around 300 megawatts, as Chair Garodnick mentioned in the beginning, installed currently around the city. So this is a large increase in our solar installation. Next slide. So what would this initiative do? Zoning for carbon neutrality would focus on fixing impediments in 4 key areas. These are also the 4 key categories from our city's roadmap to 80 by 50. These include supporting a renewably based energy grid by broadly allowing for distributed generation, that's a term for wind and solar, as well as critically needed energy storage across the city. It would support the retrofitting of our building stock by getting zoning out of the way of making buildings clean and efficient by accommodating a wider range of building retrofits. It would support, in the transportation sector, it would support the growth of electric vehicles and micromobility by removing zoning restrictions on where this infrastructure can be placed. And when it comes to our city's solid waste and stormwater output, it would complement other city efforts to reduce that output by updating and clarifying the related zoning regulations. To give you a sense of the issues we're looking at, which can get pretty quickly, it can pretty quickly get into the technical weeds, tonight I'll show you 5 key examples of the types of problems we're looking into. Next slide. The first example tonight has to do with rooftop solar. 10 years ago, in 2012, Zone Green created new rules to allow rooftop solar to be installed above rooftops, even above the zoning height limit. However, we were also greatly concerned with preserving neighborhood character and instituted height limits on panels themselves, setbacks from the facade, and rooftop coverage caps. The intent was to keep the solar installation small and inobtrusive. However, since 2012, the climate emergency has grown, and we realize the need to get as much solar installed on our rooftops as possible. If you overlay our zoning rules as well as other rules that have been adopted since 2012, including new FDNY setbacks, the result is that only a small portion of the rooftop can be used for an elevated solar canopy. To illustrate this, in the diagram of a typical mid-density building rooftop here, the red tinted portions of this rooftop solar canopy would not be permitted under our current zoning regulations. Only the portion outlined in green would be allowed. And at scale, across thousands of buildings in this city, this zoning limitation will hold our city back from meeting our climate goals. Next slide. The next example pertains to energy storage. And by this, I essentially mean big batteries. Energy storage is a key component of a clean energy grid, saving energy generated by the sun and wind for times of peak demand, such as a summer evening when millions of New Yorkers return to their homes after a busy day and crank up their air conditioning. We can't just fire up another fossil-powered turbine when needed like we used to. Energy storage systems, or ESS for short, will be needed at grid-owned sites, but also at the point of consumption, embedded in our city's neighborhoods where energy can be pre-positioned to help avoid brownouts or the use of dirty peaker plants. But energy storage isn't addressed in zoning. There's a special permit from the Board of Standards and Appeals, our sister agency, but this process has been used by very few. It takes multiple years, and it can stymie the rollout of this urgently needed emerging technology. We have been and will continue to work with our partners at DOB and FDNY to explore safe and appropriate as-of-right allowances to support the broad adoption of energy storage across the city. Next slide. The next example relates to building retrofits. Basically, every one of our city's million buildings will need to be retrofitted for efficiency and electrification. Zoning can be a barrier in a number of small technical ways. One example, shown here, relates to what we call a recladding of a whole building, removal of its entire exterior and replacement with a new high-performance one. If a typical mid-century office building removes a thin, say 4-inch, in this case, curtain wall, to replace it with a thicker, in this case 11-inch high-performance wall, they'll run into a problem. Zoning considers wall thickness part of the building's FAR, or floor area ratio. Basically, the amount of square footage of development rights you're permitted on your property. If your building was built to its maximum FAR, as is generally the case, then replacing your curtain wall with a thicker one would increase your FAR, which is not allowed. This zoning prohibition stops the retrofit dead in its tracks. This is an example, among many, of small technical glitches that we're cataloging and planning to resolve as part of this work. Next slide. Now we'll turn to the transportation sector. We know that New York City is lagging when it comes to electric vehicle adoption. A fraction of 1% of the nearly 2 million private vehicles registered in New York City are zero emission. There are a lot of hurdles to electric vehicle adoption: cost, supply chain, federal policy. Zoning may not be the biggest issue, but we believe it is a contributing factor. And that's because in dense urban environments, one of the biggest challenges to owning an EV is finding an off-street parking space to charge the car overnight. On-street charging is regulated by DOT, and our zoning rules regulate off-street parking, and specifically EV charging, in one of two ways. First, imagine a freestanding electric gas station where members of the public can pull up and charge quickly. These facilities are not allowed in the widest range of zoning districts in the city, something that we're looking at expanding. Second, zoning does allow charging to be added to existing parking facilities as an accessory use. However, this doesn't override the rules around how that parking space itself is used. If the space was required by zoning due to the construction of, say, a residential building, that EV charging infrastructure can only be used by residents of the building. We're looking at loosening this up so that if a building owner invests in EV infrastructure and it's underused because residents don't have EVs or went away for the weekend, we want zoning to allow for other EV owners in the community to be allowed to benefit from that underused infrastructure for charging. Next slide. Lastly, I'll turn to our solid waste and stormwater for an example of how a small change could make improvements to our stormwater collection. While our waste stream is a relatively small part of the city's carbon footprint, it has some straightforward solutions. For example, when stormwater flows into our combined sewer system, it's directed to our city's stormwater treatment plants where it must be cleaned before being returned to the environment. However, this water could instead be retained on site. And one way to do that is through the use of bioswales or rain gardens, which absorb extra stormwater during storm events and slowly release it over time. Now, zoning requires street trees to be installed along the sidewalk whenever a new development or an enlargement occurs. However, zoning only specifies that these street trees be installed in a standard street tree pit. But there's an opportunity here to update these rules to allow for other innovative designs, such as rain gardens designed by DOT and DEP, our sister agencies, and depicted here, to be used as well. So hopefully that gives a sense of the research that we're working on as part of our carbon neutrality efforts here. And I'm happy to turn things over to Matt, who will speak about economic opportunity.
Thank you, Nihilus. Next slide, please. My name is Matt Waskevitz, and I am a planner here at New York City Planning with our Economic Development and Regional Planning Division. And I am the lead planner for Zoning for Economic Opportunity, which is a citywide zoning initiative that will make it easier for New Yorkers to locate or grow a business anywhere in the city and to take aim at our storefront vacancy by modernizing and clarifying our city zoning. And this will allow for a wider variety of activities that can create vibrancy on our commercial streets and can lower the cost and the time that it takes to start a new business. Next slide, please. I'll first outline 3 main goals that we have as part of economic opportunity in the city of Yes. The first goal is to create a more resilient economy coming out of the pandemic and allowing all kinds of existing spaces within our commercial streets to be repurposed. And this will give us the ability to have businesses be able to meet the needs of our commercial streets and the needs of New Yorkers as they change over time. Our second goal is for allowing the creation of flexible new space that can grow jobs and allow our economy to adapt as the industries of tomorrow can be able to occupy our spaces and make sure that that New York is able to adapt and grow and change and become more vibrant as the economy itself changes. Our last goal is to bring jobs closer to where people live, especially in transit accessible locations across all 5 boroughs. And so over the next several slides, I'm going to walk through some of the examples of problems and challenges that we've heard at city planning that we're hoping to address as part of this initiative, and in some of the opportunities that we see in meeting these goals. And then I'll broaden a bit at the end to describe in more depth the zoning changes that we hope to make as part of this initiative. Next slide, please. In our first example, we have a bike shop owner on the Upper West Side, and they've been interested in also doing some bike rentals and repairs. It's a pretty typical range of services, especially along many of our neighborhood commercial districts. However, the commercial zoning on his street does not allow rentals, repairs, just sales. And so he would have to move from the neighborhood commercial district he's in, which is a C1 district, to a neighboring neighborhood commercial district called a C2 district. And in many parts of the city, our C1 districts and our C2 districts are located sometimes a couple blocks away, and they may even be located right across the street from one another. And so our city zoning is full of outdated and unnecessary and oftentimes confusing restrictions that make it expensive and time consuming for a small business owner to understand where they can locate in the city and what they can do in their space. Especially true in our neighborhood commercial districts, our C1 districts. And so this initiative will modernize and clarify zoning to reduce the cost and the time that it takes to start a business right here in New York City. And this will give entrepreneurs clarity about where they can rent space for their business, and this can save them tens of thousands of dollars. Next slide, please. In our next example, we have an artist in Harlem who's interested in opening up a studio to teach arts to children. They've found a great space. It's a vacant space with lots of foot traffic. But however, they're in one of our higher density districts, a C4 district. And in this district, art studios and many other activities are not permitted on the ground floor. And so this artist will have to keep looking to find another zoning district that will allow them to occupy a studio here in the vacant storefront. New York City has over 8,500 vacant storefronts. Zoning for economic opportunity will take aim at our storefront vacancy crisis by allowing a much wider variety of activities to occur in our commercial streets, things like art studios. And this will open up spaces for new kinds of businesses to locate, and it will therefore reduce storefront vacancy across the city, creating thousands of jobs in the process. One of the ways we hope to do this is fixing some of the outdated prohibition of activities on the ground floor, like art and dance studios. Zoning for economic opportunity will allow these businesses to locate along any commercial street. Next slide, please. In our third example, we have a building owner in Sunnyside, Queens, who has had difficulty leasing space over the last few years. But recently, a high-tech manufacturer had reached out and they're interested in leasing a floor of this building, industrial building in the photo here. However, our zoning requires that the number of loading docks or loading berths that are in a building have to be based on the use of the building. So if you're going to change from an office use to a manufacturing use, as in this example, it may require the business owner to physically retrofit the building that they have and add additional loading docks. And this could be so cost prohibitive that it would prevent the high-tech manufacturer from even moving into the vacant space. And so this is one aspect of zoning for economic opportunity where we want to level the playing field for our manufacturers and make sure that they can occupy spaces as our buildings are changing over time. Next slide, please. In our next example, we have an owner of a tapas bar and they have some live music on weekends, and they're interested in setting aside a small space for dancing. However, our zoning resolution prohibits dancing in many commercial districts, and so they would not be allowed to have any dancing. The city's cabaret laws have a history that's rooted in discrimination, and the city council had previously voted a few years back to remove these restrictions. But our zoning still prohibits dancing of any kind in many of our commercial streets. Zoning for economic opportunity will address this discrepancy by making sure that our zoning is brought into alignment with the city council's intention when they repealed the cabaret laws. Next slide, please. In this example, we have a bakery in Carroll Gardens in Brooklyn. They've been so successful that they're interested in expanding and occupying a vacant storefront right next door. And this will allow them to have more space to be able to sell to other stores and restaurants in the area, as well as maintain selling for consumers who walk in and want to buy breads and other pastries. But unfortunately, our zoning right now prohibits bakeries from having more than 750 square feet that they devote to production of their food. And if they grow any larger than that in our zoning, they would be considered a food manufacturer and they would have to relocate to one of the city's industrial districts. And this would remove them from the customer base that they've grown and would reduce the vibrancy and the economic activity on the commercial streets. So at the moment in our zoning, there is no path to growing a business like a bakery on our commercial streets beyond a certain size. So zoning for economic opportunity will, for the first time, allow small scale producers like bakeries and other food manufacturers, but also other kinds of small scale producers like apparel makers and woodworking shops to locate and grow along commercial corridors in all 5 boroughs. In fact, zoning for economic opportunity represents the largest expansion of space available for small scale producers in more than 60 years. Next slide, please. Speaking of industrial businesses, in this example, we have an owner of an industrial building in Sunnyside, Queens. It's the 1-story building on the left-hand side of this photo, where he operates a film lighting rental business. The business has grown, and as they've grown, they've considered expanding upward and adding a couple of extra stories of offices and additional production space. Ideally, they would then create a sort of size that matches the building on the right-hand side of the photo. But when the owner reached out to city planning, he discovered that our zoning does not have any tools that will allow for him to create the 3-story industrial building that he wants. And as a result, he might have to relocate outside of the city in order to grow his business at the scale that he would like to grow it at. And so zoning for economic opportunity will create new tools that fill in gaps in our existing zoning framework within our industrial areas that can allow industrial businesses to grow in place rather than having to relocate elsewhere. Next slide, please. In our last example, we have a community member who's concerned about the impact that dark stores, like a 15-minute grocery delivery, might be having on the neighborhood. They think the fact that windows and doors have been papered over is harming the pedestrian experience on their commercial street. And so our zoning does have ground floor design requirements in some locations, but the rules change from place to place. They're pretty inconsistent and they don't apply in this particular area. And so as part of zoning for economic opportunity, we're looking to create a clear and consistent rules that make it more easier for businesses to understand what they can do in their space, while also activating the streets to make sure that they are vibrant in creating economic activity. Next slide, please. So bringing this all together, zoning for economic opportunity will do several things that we hope altogether will create a more equitable and vibrant environment for our small businesses across the city, make it easier for them to locate and grow, and can address storefront vacancy by creating a wider variety and diversity of businesses on our commercial streets. The ways in which this initiative will do this are first to allow the same kinds of business activities in our similar districts. So our neighborhood commercial districts, these being our C1 and our C2 districts, we think that they should allow for the same mix of local retail and commercial businesses. Similarly, our office and regionally serving districts, these being our C4, our C5, and C6 districts, we think that they should permit a similar range of activities to make sure that businesses have the flexibility that they need that works for them to ensure that neighborhoods can be occupied and activated. As part of this, we want to make sure that we're removing the restrictions that exist within our C4 and C5 districts that don't allow many uses to be along the sidewalk and the ground floor. This is the example of the art studio that I gave earlier. As part of this zoning initiative, we want to be more permissive with activities that are constrained by zoning right now. And this includes small scale clean production. That could include things like 3D printing and other kinds of food manufacturing that's not allowed to occur outside of a manufacturing area at the moment. But as part of this initiative, we also want to introduce maker retail businesses. So you can have small scale production and sell right to a consumer in the same storefront. And so this would include businesses like brew pubs and coffee roasters and ceramic studios, as well as a whole variety of small scale food producers and other kinds of manufacturers. As part of this, we want to also remove the outdated restrictions on social dancing within bars and venues. As part of the initiative, when buildings are converting from one use to another over time, we want to ensure that we're removing the provisions in our zoning that would trigger the need for additional loading docks. And this can ensure that our existing buildings can remain occupied as the economy changes over time. As part of this initiative, we're also wanting to develop a range of new zoning districts that could be mapped in the future to support job growth. And this would include mid-density industrial districts that mimics the historic density of a loft-style building, but is not currently allowed in our zoning. And this would be in the 3 to 4 FAR range and in the 6 to 8 FAR range. Lastly, as we're being more permissive about uses within spaces, we want to make sure that the spaces are still designed to be attractive and activate our sidewalks. And so as part of this initiative, we are proposing clear and consistent design rules for our commercial streets. And so this is zoning for economic opportunity. We welcome questions that you have in the chat. We are just at the beginning stages of this process, so we welcome your feedback and questions. And with that, I will turn things over to John.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate it. Next slide, please. Welcome to the City of Yes proposal for housing opportunity. I'm John Mangian from City Planning's Housing Division, and these are the zoning changes to support equitable development in neighborhoods across New York City. Next slide, please. So the proposals that you'll see here emerge directly from where we live. And that's the city's Fair Housing Report created by HPD with over 150 community organizations and dozens of meetings all over the city. And what Where We Live is an analysis of impediments to fair housing in New York City. It's a remarkably frank look at how we got to where we are today, which is a very diverse but very segregated city. And it outlines goals and strategies and concrete actions that we as a city can take to further fair housing strategies and principles. Where We Live also identifies it's an amazing report, the real human costs of our housing shortage, things like high rents, displacement pressure, segregation, gentrification, tenant harassment, and homelessness, among other ills, the things that we hate about the housing market. Identifies those as things that result when there's just not enough housing for people. And I would encourage everybody here to take a look at it. If you want a guide to why the city is doing what it's doing on housing policy, this is the document. And the idea behind these proposals is to remove many of the obstacles to equitable housing development that we've unintentionally created in recent decades in the zoning. And we believe that relatively small changes and adjustments to the zoning across a wide geography, citywide, can create a lot of housing. And when every neighborhood does its part, fewer neighborhoods are overburdened or face dramatic changes. Next slide, please. So what does this mean in practice? Here are some of the things that we're looking at this point. Like Chair Gorodnick said, we're talking to you very early in the process, way before we've even started to put pen to paper on zoning text or the proposals themselves. We're sharing these approaches for your feedback and to answer your questions today. So what does it mean? Allow housing types that serve everyone. And we're thinking about types that have been neglected or abused, like ADUs or smaller units or shared housing models that, similar to some of the proposals that Matt and Nilas outlined. These are things that, whether out of prejudice or an exclusionary impulse, we've made a lot harder to do over recent decades, but they can form a very important niche in the housing market. So we want to bring back some of these housing types that serve everyone, instead of forcing people into roommate situations that can increase pressure on family-sized units elsewhere in the city. We also want to ease conversions of obsolete and underutilized buildings to housing, and can kill two birds with one stone, create more housing and give new life to those underutilized buildings. We want to elevate people over parking and reduce or eliminate unnecessary parking requirements where we can, to reduce that conflict between parking and housing that we see on sites around the city. We want to give all forms of affordable housing, including supportive housing, the same preference that we give to affordable senior housing in medium and high density districts across the city. And finally, we want to make it easier for owners of homes and small buildings to get what they need from the city, whether that's DCP or DOB or BSA or HPD, that you don't need to have, an expediter on staff in order to enable your buildings, your home to change and adapt over time. So I'm going to go into some examples now. Next slide. Okay, here we have a single family home in a 2-family district. And say you wanted to add a second unit in this 2-family district for your elderly mother. Well, regulations that we've layered on over the years would basically make that impossible. First, there'd be a requirement for a second off-street parking space, even though your mom hasn't driven in decades. You'd also have difficulties with minimum unit size. The inability to add an exterior staircase would also make it impossible to have a separate means of ingress and egress to that unit. And so you would just throw up your hands and not be able to do a two-family house in this supposedly two-family district. And we'd like to make adjustments to the zoning to enable things like two-family houses in two-family districts again, to make our districts do what they say they can do and address some of those impediments that we've layered on incrementally over the decades. Next slide, please. So here you have a building form that people know and that people like, 2 or 3 stories of residential above a retail ground floor. If the owner of the 1-story buildings on the left wanted to replicate that today, again, they'd quickly find out that it's just impossible. First of all, the combined parking requirements for both commercial and residential, there's just not enough space on the site to provide those. Secondly, even though every building up and down the block is developed to a similar size restrictions in terms of floor area ratio limits and height limits would also make it impossible to replicate that building form that you see on your right on the left. So we'd like to look at adjustments to lower density commercial districts to make this type of housing possible again as well. Next slide, please. Here we have another old building form that people know and that people like. It's a development full of no-frills studios. You can't build this today because we implemented average minimum unit size requirements in the 1961 zoning. We know that a lot of people in New York City want to live alone, but can't. We force these folks, younger New Yorkers, older New Yorkers, some, marginally housed populations, and we force these people to find roommates and take family size apartments in neighborhoods around the city, or, we force them into even worse situations. And we can adjust the rules to make these possible again and take some of the pressure off of existing family sized units. Next slide, please. Here you have a vacant hotel. Let's say you had a nonprofit that wanted to convert this to supportive housing. Well, you'd quickly find out that the zoning regulations we have to facilitate adaptive reuse of non-residential buildings just doesn't apply if you're trying to convert to supportive housing, which is a community facility use. Without those rules, that nonprofit would be stuck with an overbuilt building that doesn't comply with light and air standards, and they wouldn't be able to convert it to supportive housing. If you tried to convert it to residential, on the other hand, we'd find out that the dwelling unit factor, that average minimum unit size, would require extensive renovations, basically a gut rehab to combine multiple hotel rooms into individual apartments in a way that meant the only thing that would pencil out here is probably pretty high-end housing. These conversion regs also generally apply in Manhattan below 60th and in parts of Brooklyn and Queens along the East River, some other parts of the city as well. So they're geographically limited. They're also limited in terms of the age of the buildings that can use them. In most places, you have to be a pre-61 building. And so we're looking at a range of ways to potentially make these conversion regs just work better to enable more adaptive reuse of obsolete and underutilized office buildings, hotels, and other non-residential buildings. Next slide, please. Next example. Here we have a one-story church on a nice corner lot in Bushwick. Say, as we've seen on sites around the city, that the church wants to partner with a housing nonprofit or a housing developer to build a new church with housing on top. Well, today on this site, they'd be limited to probably about 35 units. If they found somebody who could do affordable senior housing, a specialized form of housing, they might be able to get an additional 10 to 12 on top of that. But if we were to give the same preference to allow the same size building for all forms of affordable and supportive housing as we do for senior affordable, then it would be a lot easier for this church to redevelop, get a new church on the ground floor and cellar with up to 10, 12 additional units on top, as long as those additional units were permanently affordable. 10 or 12 units may not seem like much, but if you multiply that over hundreds of development sites across the city, it really starts to add up. Next slide, please. Here we have a pretty nice development site in Bed-Stuy, a pretty short walk to the subway stop. If somebody were redeveloping this site today, it's almost certain that they would stop at 10 units. As soon as they add the 11th unit, you have a 6-spot parking requirement that's just really hard to fit on this site. And so instead of going up to 16 or 20 units, which would have a 8 or 10 spot requirement, they would just stop at 10, call it a day, waive out of the parking. If we make intelligent adjustments to the waiver threshold here or to the requirement ratio, or if we decide this is a geography where parking should be optional, then this site would be able to develop 16 or 20 units. So housing over parking. Again, that might not seem like that much when we're looking at one site, but you aggregate that to dozens and hundreds of sites across the city, and you're talking about a lot of new housing. Next slide. So thank you very much. Those were the zoning for housing opportunity proposals, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much, John. Well, we're really happy you had a moment to see some of the ideas that we've been thinking about as we've been looking through our zoning code. We'd like to now open it up for questions. I will remind you how you might be able to answer questions. If we could put the slides back up for one moment. Next slide, please. So as a reminder, for those who have attended before, this will look familiar to you. Attended a DCP info session before, this will look familiar to you. You can continue using the Zoom Q&A feature to provide questions, written questions. You can also ask questions live. If you raise your hand, staff will notify me of your raised hand and I will call on you. You'll be able to unmute and also turn on your camera if you so choose. If you are on phone, you can raise your hand by pressing *9. And then we will show on the next slide how you can unmute yourself. I will call you your name if you are by phone. I will call your name by your phone number, the last digits of your phone number. So just please make sure to be paying attention for that, as I don't have your name listed. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to hand it over to my colleague, Tom Smith, who will kind of run down the run of show for the question and answer period.
Thank you, Lara. When it is your turn to speak, your name will be called and you will be granted temporary speaking privileges by the Department of City Planning staff, and you will be promoted to panelist. This will allow you to unmute your microphone and the ability to turn on your camera. Please note that promoting speakers can take some time, so we ask that everyone be patient. Once your name has been called, we will help you unmute your microphone and you will be asked to convey your questions. To allow us to hear from everyone who wishes to speak, we ask that you please limit your remarks to 3 minutes. A 3-minute countdown clock will run on the screen. If you are participating online, at the 3-minute mark, your time will expire. At that time, you will be asked to conclude your remarks. If you choose to turn on your camera, we will be able to see you. Next slide, please. An additional note of instructions for those joining us by phone today. If you wish to ask questions via telephone, please select *9 when prompted. Please listen for me to call out the last 3 digits of your phone number. At that point, you will be given temporary ability to speak. You must press *6 to unmute your telephone, and we will be able to hear you speak. When your testimony is complete or your 3 minutes have expired, whichever comes first, you must press *6 again to mute yourself. Please note that muting and unmuting speakers may take a moment. Next slide, please. Time limits. Speakers from the general public have 3 minutes to ask their questions or provide a comment. There are a few exceptions to the 3-minute time limit. Elected officials, for example, are given the courtesy of jumping to the front of the queue and are not limited to 3 minutes. To those of you viewing us on live stream and wishing to ask questions, please be mindful of potential background noise while speaking. Make sure that the live stream is muted when you begin to speak to avoid hearing an echo. Next slide, please. And we are about ready to take our first questions.
Great. Thank you, Tom. I appreciate that. Do we have any raised hands? I see a lot of questions in the chat. And I also want to remind you, this is one of many conversations that we'll have. So if we are unable to get to all questions tonight, there'll be more opportunities to share, as well as you can contact us directly through the DCP cityofyes_DL at planning.nyc.gov. And we'll also make sure to provide the questions on our website.
Yes, we do have several people who have raised their hands. The first person being Suen Chong. And I will be promoting you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I actually have a question for each one of the 3 presenters. So I'll take it in order. My question regarding zoning for zero carbon. We know that demolition of existing buildings releases a lot of stored carbon, and that the building materials for new buildings, particularly concrete, releases a lot of carbon emissions. Concrete is supposedly responsible for 7% of global carbon emissions. So is there anything in the zoning proposals that would promote preservation of existing buildings and prevent demolition? My second question with regards to zoning for economic opportunity, how many of these types of changes that you're proposing can today be accomplished by the property owner requesting or the business requesting a variance? It does seem like some of the proposals, some of the zoning rules that you're talking about were designed to deal with potential industrial activities that might have a nuisance effect in residential areas. So I'm just wondering what kind of safeguards you might incorporate for that. And my third question with respect to zoning for housing and economic opportunity, have you done any studies to show how many additional units would be created and where specifically those units would be concentrated based on the proposed increase in zoning and, which lots might be underbuilt or whatever? And how does that interact with the new requirement to consider how many units are being built in neighborhoods of color, in lower income neighborhoods, as part of a racial equity analysis. Also, when we're talking about the upzoning of the medium and higher density districts for affordable and supportive housing, can we assume that you're basically talking about zoning for quality and affordability, but expanded to all types of affordable housing? And there is one question I would like to note, that with ZQA, there's exactly one medium density district, which is R8B, that doesn't have any upzoning attached to it. And I'm wondering why that is, and if that's going to continue to be the case under your new proposal.
Thank you so much for that. I think, Nihilus, can we start with the carbon neutral conversation first?
Sure, happy to take that. And it's an excellent question. It's an excellent point about embodied versus operational carbon emissions. I think I'd make 2 points. One is that we are really looking at trying to facilitate retrofits of buildings. We want to support people making smart investments in their homes and their buildings as they exist today. We're not looking to facilitate the redevelopment large swaths of the city to support climate. That's not achieving our climate goals. We really are hoping that these can be targeted, tailored improvements to our zoning to facilitate smart retrofits to buildings. And I think that I'd also point out an example. So from Matt's, the project Matt presented, zoning for economic opportunity, this focus on adaptive reuse more broadly, promoting the ability to reuse buildings over time as needs change, is also an example of this sort of decarbonization thinking embedded in all of our planning efforts. So your point is well taken, and thank you for making that point. And I hope that response is helpful.
On zoning for economic opportunity, and I appreciate your question. So I think on the first part on variances, what I would say is that yes, in some instances, some of these changes right now are handled through a variance process where an individual business can choose to go to city planning and go through the uniform land use review procedure. And that can take months, and it can require the use of environmental consultants and land use attorneys and money that what we're finding is many small businesses, it's too high a cost, and it's too long a time to be able to make some of the changes they want to expand the business they have. Or they discover too late that they have located into a zoning district where their activity is not allowed. So they then have to break their lease or move. And so many of the examples I provided are instances of businesses where it's a great location, they would love to have an art studio, but there's a provision in our zoning from 1961 that prohibits an art studio from locating on a ground floor. And so in so many different instances, an art studio doesn't have the money or the time to be able to go through a ULURP process. And so they simply won't. And we think if you add up all of these instances across all 5 boroughs, you end up with a situation in which many small businesses just are not able to do what they would like to do. So that's sort of the on the first part of the variances. And on the second part of your question and introduction of new uses and instances in which, for the first time, we are including new instances, I'll focus more on the production side, because I think this is where your question, at least I heard it might be coming from. And what I would say to that is we have instances where we have small scale producers like small bakeries and ceramics, brew pubs, where this kind of impact is they're able to do their production in a very clean way. They have to abide by both state and federal regulations that were not in place in the time of our zoning in 1961 that ensures clean air and clean water, and can make sure that there is no environmental or noise or safety impact on the surrounding community. So these are instances where we've taken a look at our zoning, and we find that if you look at other cities across the country, they do allow many of these kinds of activities to occur on their commercial streets, no problem whatsoever. Their zoning has kept up as the economy has changed over time. Ours, in many instances, simply hasn't. And so what we're looking to do here is unlock new kinds of space for businesses to have the kind of entrepreneurial activity that they would like to do, and that we think can facilitate new kinds of businesses across the city. I hope these answer your questions.
Hello, on your zoning for housing opportunity questions about, have we done an analysis of where we expect housing production to happen under these proposals? First, I would say this proposal definitely will require an EIS, an environmental impact statement, that will require us to do that form of analysis and make it public well in advance of any kind of, entering the process into ULURP. So yes, we definitely are looking at that already, and we'll have public information on that as we go forward. I do want to point us back to first principles around zoning for housing opportunity, which is that we really believe incremental growth, incremental changes across a wide geography can create a lot of housing without dramatic changes in any one neighborhood. If every neighborhood does its part, then fewer neighborhoods are overburdened, fewer neighborhoods face those dramatic changes. And so that's really what we're trying to do with these proposals, to forward a set of proposals such that every neighborhood is doing its part and no neighborhoods feel overburdened or unfairly singled out. These proposals will definitely trigger review under the new racial equity reporting regime under Local Law 78. And so we'll be engaging in full racial equity reporting for these proposals as well. As far as your question on the additional FAR for affordable and supportive housing, we would just add affordable and supportive housing to the preferential FAR structure that AIRS already gets in most medium and high density districts. You mentioned R8B, where affordable senior housing doesn't get a preferential FAR. And I would just, underscore where we are in the process right now, which is very early on, where, we don't even have fully baked proposals yet. We're seeking your guidance and feedback. And so we definitely have noted that there's a district, R8B, where senior housing doesn't get a preferential FAR. We haven't made any decisions about, what, if anything, to do about that. But great question.
Thank you, John. We'll move on to another hand raised. Logan Ferris. I apologize if I pronounced your last name wrong. You can unmute yourself and ask your question. Okay, Logan.
Hi, sorry about that. Can you see me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. So my name is Logan Ferris. I'm the political director at Open New York. I am really excited to see that you all are rethinking the parking requirements. And I know that we're early in the process here, but it seems unclear so far on how far you intend to go for this. And just thinking, given how difficult it is to update the city zoning code and how long it can take, will you propose a full elimination of the city's mandatory parking requirements?
Thank you for your question. John, do you want to talk
Sure.
about parking?
I'll say that our amazing transportation division here is sort of like waist deep in analysis of how parking works in various districts and various geographies across the city. And that, we've already in the process, we've heard a lot of concerns from both sides of this question. People who, want us to be extremely aggressive, up to and including eliminating all parking minimums across the city. Other folks and elected officials who, are concerned about, going too far on parking. And I can say that guided by our transportation division's analysis, that we'll definitely be looking to ensure that we're reducing conflicts between housing and parking on development sites around the city where at all appropriate.
Thank you. Next, we have hand raised from Eva Chan, the Harlem East Block Association.
Hello.
Hi, Eva. How are you?
Very good. How are you? Thank you for giving me opportunity to ask a question. My first question has to do with basically the equity distribution of drug treatment clinics and safe injection sites, various harm reduction facilities. Right now, they are excessively densely located in East Harlem. So what would the land use committee do to more equitably distribute them throughout New York City to make sure that all patients have access to these facilities? Related to this is a question of, can we either use zoning or law to mandate all hospitals to provide treatment? Because right now, a lot of time is spent on debating where these facilities should be sited, and there is an opioid crisis going on in the city. So that's question number one. Question number two is more specifically related to zoning for safe injection site. Right now, for a liquor store needs to be 200 feet away from schools or playground, but there is no such zoning restriction for safe injection site or harm reduction facilities, or even drug treatment facilities. I'm all in support of these facilities. I do want to reduce exposure of our children. So I want to ask the commissioner if there are plans to impose some zoning restriction. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your questions, Eva. These are really important questions that I know are important in every community, and I have heard quite a bit from East Harlem community about this. I think for these questions are not necessarily related to zoning. And so we will certainly bring this back and talk to our colleagues at our other agencies, including health and hospitals. But I think for sure the administration is very focused on making sure that we are locating these across the city and making sure that they're safe for users and safe for communities as well.
May I ask why you think the zoning of harm reduction facilities is not in your purview?
I think it's not in the purview of this particular amendment, but it's definitely something that we can look at as we're thinking about the proposals.
Okay, thank you. I'll write an email as a way to follow up.
Thank you so much, Eva. Next, we have Robert Stern.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, hi, Robert Stern with the Morningside Heights Community Coalition. First of all, thank you for putting together this presentation. I'm very excited about the City of Yes campaign. I don't know how familiar you are with Morningside Heights. We haven't had rezoning since 1961, and other areas surrounding us have been rezoned. So developers are targeting our neighborhood by buying up air rights and land from institutions and building all luxury towers. So in response, my organization, Morningside Heights Community Coalition, with working closely with the City Council Land Use Division, have come up with a plan that will limit luxury overdevelopment, promote affordable housing, and encourage commercial opportunities similar to the kinds of aspects of the plan that I've heard here tonight from you. We are being co-sponsored by Mark Levine, our council member Sean Abreu, and also Community Board 9. We feel that this could become a model perhaps for other communities. And my question is, do you encourage or are you willing to work with communities to develop their own plans that meet similar criteria to the City of Yes campaign, actually working with the community similar to the way perhaps the City Council Land Use Division is doing right now? Is that something that you're considering?
Thanks, Robert. Yeah, as you've seen in the proposal for zoning for housing opportunity, the main thrust of this effort is to ensure that every neighborhood across the city does its part. And so, we would hope that any neighborhoods that feel in any way overburdened would be supportive of those efforts to ensure that we're forwarding a set of proposals that enables every neighborhood to do its part. And so in that spirit, we definitely are supportive of any neighborhood efforts to do their part within that broader citywide context that aims to ensure that we're all in this together, addressing our housing shortage and all the consequences of that housing shortage without forcing any neighborhoods to feel overburdened or like they have to undergo dramatic changes as we do that.
Thank you, John.
Robert, you've been muted.
Okay, I think we're going to move on to a couple questions from the chat. The first question that I have on the list is Anne Seligman, who I think also has a hand raised. So we'll answer your question in the chat now, and then please keep your hand up if you also have additional questions. But the question in the chat was, will this presentation be shared with viewers? Absolutely. This presentation will be on our website. And you can also watch a recording of this webinar on the Department of City Planning YouTube channel, which you can also access through our website. The next question from Maxine Barnes is, when is the public hearing on the key component BLAST scheduled for? If people are not aware, BLAST is our initiative to work with other agencies to think about how our processes are, to evaluate our processes and to make sure that we're providing accurate information, being transparent, and expediting any moments in the process that the city may extend the time on. So BLAST is sorry, I want to make sure the ASL interpreter is okay. So BLAST, there's more to come, and we don't have a scheduled public hearing at the moment, but we will surely be advertising and putting more information out as it's available. The next question from Nancy Sheeran. Will historic districts be protected from zoning changes? All the components that you heard about this evening are always reviewed by, in historic districts, will have the same review pattern as with the Landmark Agency. So for sure, you'll be seeing that things will be protected within LPC, and conversations will continue through that review process. There's quite a few questions, so we'll make sure that we're getting through them. From Richard, we have a question about carbon neutrality. We need to keep in mind that smaller existing structures may have to be either renovated or replaced to meet sustainability standards. Many of these buildings have no insulation at all and are burning fossil fuels. Unless significant funds are made available to owners for these renovations, it may prove to make more sense to build new modern structures. What can be done by the city to allow funding to be available? All of the zoning changes in the world will not help if conversions or rebuilding funding is not available. I will let Nihilus speak to this as well. But I do want to say that as we're looking at all these proposals, we are working with our sister agencies to make sure that, we are supporting local businesses, we're supporting local owners, we're supporting all of our projects here. So we will be working with our sister agencies to make sure that this is a round out conversation. I don't know, Nihilus, if there's anything you wanted to add, but for sure, this is an important aspect that we want to, make sure that we're in contact and doing as much as we can. But this particular thing is within the zoning changes that we're looking at tonight.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to add some considerations. I mean, I'll start by saying yes. This effort to retrofit buildings, not just in New York City, but across the country, across the globe, to make them efficient is going to be very challenging and costly. So I hear you. I think that our research thus far has really been focused on building retrofits, as I mentioned earlier. And we believe that there are ways to retrofit buildings almost in every case. When it comes to funding, the point is very well taken. And I would note that the New York City Accelerator, NYC Accelerator, is sort of a first stop for any home or building owner who's trying to navigate this challenge. It's a key way for home and building owners to access information, advice, and get guidance towards pathways to funding. And then New York State and the federal government are also rolling out programs to support these urgently needed retrofits here in the city and more broadly. And that is developing. So we will continue to monitor it and share that information with communities as we're able to. But thank you for the question.
Thank you. Let's go back to some live questions. Teresa Westerdahl, are you there? Teresa?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I put my questions in the chat, some of them. I'm wanting to know how this relates to BLAST, and also how it relates to community boards and city council.
So for these proposals that we're developing right now, they will go through the ULURP process, which will provide an opportunity for public hearings and comments within at the CPC, at the City Planning Commission, at the community boards, as well as with the City Council. So it will go through the proper process once we get to that point.
Well, the BLAST proposal cites that City Planning wants to remove the community board ULURP process along with City Council deference powers to say no to rezoning projects in their districts. I've also, with the parking removal in my committee meetings and in my community board meetings, parking is a big problem that a lot of people bring up with various developments in their neighborhoods, wanting to change alt parking in their neighborhood. And it seems to be a huge concern for people. And I hear you bringing up the EV charging stations, while at the same time removing parking requirements for future developments. I'm really see that as a big problem, and would urge the community, the city planning to, along with sunroofs, solar panels, ask that charging stations be put in place with parking and not have the parking removed at all. It just makes sense. If we want EV vehicles, where are they going to charge? There's nowhere for them. So let's build more parking and with EV charging station in any new development so that we can meet those standards, because there's nowhere for that to happen right now. It's impossible otherwise. So please consider that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that comment. It's very important. I don't know, Nihilus, if there's anything you wanted to add to that. But just to answer your blast question, we're going to have more information coming out of the administration soon on blast. And we'll definitely make sure that you can find that information on our websites, social media, and of course, if you're signed up to receive emails from our agencies, you'll get it there as well. Sorry, Nihilus.
Sure. Yeah, no, not a problem. So I think the question was about where EV charging can happen. And I think that what we're hoping to do, and what we've been hearing from practitioners and EV owners and community members thus far, is that there are a number of places. So I'll start by saying there are thousands of parking spaces already in existence in New York City, that there have been challenges they've faced getting EV charging into those parking spaces. There are a couple of very narrow technical issues there with regard to how zoning views those parking spaces when EV charging is added, and who that EV charging can be used by. And I think that that's sort of absolutely understood and hear you, that we need more off-street EV charging, and I completely agree with that. And that's certainly something that we're looking at as part of this proposal. And is that helpful?
Thank you, Nihilus.
No problem.
I think we'll go to our next live, Maxine Barnes.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Hi, yes. Well, correct me if I'm wrong. I think you answered another participant that the city of Yes would be rezoning under zoning for economic opportunity and zoning for housing opportunity. They will be rezoning commercial as well as residential for those looking to expand. And question 2 is, what new written zoning laws, policies, and process additions are attached to this City of Yes for oversight and implementation of these proposals and initiatives?
Thank you for your question. John, I don't know if you want to join.
Sure. Yeah, these are text amendments, proposed changes to the zoning text. They wouldn't change the district designation you see on zoning maps themselves, but they would change how some of those regulations work. If and when something is enacted for these proposals, and you're correct that zoning for economic opportunity and zoning for housing opportunity will touch the full range of zoning districts from residential to commercial to manufacturing. If and when those regulations change, that typically gets enforced by the Department of Buildings. So they're the ones who enforce the zoning text. When it comes to some of the housing initiatives that we talked about, we partner very closely with HPD, especially when the initiatives are facilitating affordable housing, to make sure that they represent a set of programs that can create housing, that HPD can support and administer over time. So it really is a team effort among city agencies to do stuff like this. And I know that other teams have been working with agencies like SBS, Small Business Services, the Board of Standards and Appeals, the Department of Transportation, et cetera, to make sure that these proposals make sense and that are ultimately administrable and enforceable over time. I hope that answers your question.
Oh, okay. So to be clear, you would not rezone without going through a ULUP in this, which you describe as streamlining. It would go, you wouldn't just rezone any commercial or residential area, these folks looking to expand, et cetera, without it going through the ULUP. Am I correct or?
Yes, yeah, that's right. So these proposals, they, the things we've talked about tonight are pretty far reaching. They would apply citywide, but they absolutely, positively have to go through a lot more analysis, formulation, consultation with the public, with elected officials, with sister agencies, et cetera, before they even officially enter public review, which will go to the community boards, will go to the borough presidents, will go to the city planning commission, will go to city council as well. So, this is a little different from how we, have operated sometimes in the past, where we're just coming out way in advance of these proposals to hear, what you think about it and what other sort of stakeholders in these proposals think about it before we enter into, that ULURP or text amendment process.
Okay, thank you so much for taking my question. Could I quickly say, please consider the alcohol, music, and dancing on these commercial corridors, the proximity of residential in that area. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're going to go back online for some written questions. There was a question from Nicola Cox. Are the power grids in residential areas ready to handle the extra power used by electric vehicles? What measures will be in place to monitor and ensure no brownouts and blackouts?
Yeah, so this is Nihilus. We're working very closely with Con Edison on this proposal. The grid does have room to grow on a general daily basis. Furthermore, as we continue to reduce our energy needs through efficiency improvements and upgrades, and as we continue to embed distributed generation, so that's solar in particular, and distributed storage, so that's batteries, into the grid, we'll continue to have more room to grow as our energy needs switch from fossil fuel to electricity, and that includes buildings and vehicles.
Thank you so much, Nihilus. And now I think we'll go to a question from Jim Wright that's focused on economic opportunity. Will you be considering more robust urban design guidelines for manufacturing districts to promote mixed-use neighborhoods and pedestrian-oriented streetscapes? This should include requiring transparent facade treatments in manufacturing buildings.
Thank you, Jim, for the feedback. And it's exactly the kind of feedback we're looking for at this early stage in the process. We'll look into this, certainly. And there are, of course, many special design challenges within our M districts and the different kinds of uses and users that we have in these districts. And so we know that we will have to take a much closer look at this. Our urban design division has been going out and taking a look at our commercial corridors and some of these conflicts we're seeing between uses. But we're going to continue looking at this. So I appreciate you raising this as an issue to delve deeper into throughout this process.
Thank you so much. Wow, there's so many good questions here. It's wonderful to see all of these questions in the chat. We're coming close on time, so I want to get to the couple live questions that we have as well. So I wanted to, I see Rachel Scal is next.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Rachel. Yes.
Hi, thanks so much. My name is Rachel Scull. I'm associate at Cozen O'Connor, land use attorney. I was just curious. I know Matt mentioned that as part of zoning for economic opportunity, be looking at loading berth requirements for manufacturing. And I wanted to find out whether you'll also be looking into loading requirements for commercial uses. I've definitely had people come to me looking to reuse often industrial spaces that have been vacant for some time. Most recently, a client who wanted to open just a small independent gym, but it would have required a loading berth. And so they lost out on that lease. So I was wondering if that's something that will be looked into as well.
Short answer is yes. And I thank you for raising that. I'm going to try and keep it short so we can get through as many questions as we can.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Next, Michael Scotland.
Just a quick question regarding the housing situation. Two things. In order to address the affordable housing issue, when are we going to actually address the proliferation of luxury housing that is being built? You know, in neighborhoods like Williamsburg, Dumbo, downtown Brooklyn, it is not affordable. It is all luxury. So wouldn't it have been better to maybe offer more affordable units? Also, the conversions of office buildings in Manhattan, they are being converted to luxury apartment buildings, specifically the Wall Street area. Wall Street is no longer office buildings. They have been converted to luxury housing. So I think the approach to adding or asking for people to then support ADUs when that is such a small offering, and also, are you going to then hire more inspectors in order to regulate and make sure that these units are up to par, and if they are up to code? I mean, there's an issue with getting inspections done now. So how is all of this going to be addressed with your plan, basically?
Thanks a lot for your question. We agree completely and wholeheartedly support the programs in our toolbox to create mixed income housing with real affordable housing. Like our IH programs, including the most recent one, mandatory inclusionary housing, and including the state tax benefit that requires affordable housing. We fully support adjusting AMI levels for that to create real affordable housing in neighborhoods around the city where market rate multifamily production happens. If you saw the presentation on the proposals, most of which strongly encourage and support the production of more affordable housing in conjunction with our sister agency, HPD. So for instance, the proposal to increase FARs, to extend that preferential FAR to all forms of affordable and supportive housing, that would be really meaningful. It would enable a little bit bigger buildings on sites around the city, but the only thing that you could put in that increment, the new floor area that's allowed by those proposals, would be permanently affordable housing. And so, in many different ways, we're trying to encourage, when development happens in neighborhoods across the city, that it includes apartments for families at a full range of income. And so these, as well as many of our recent programs, are really intended to encourage neighborhood economic diversity when and where development happens. As for ADUs, yes, we're trying to create an ADU program, if we move forward with it, that will be easy for people to use, easy for them to add an ADU, and easy for our sister agencies to enforce. That's really the name of the game. And we agree with you completely that creating some program that's hard to use and that is unenforceable, would be a failure on our part. So we're definitely aware of those issues that you raised. Thank you.
Thank you, John. So we have 2 more hands raised. We are getting close to 9. So I think we're going to take these 2 questions. And then I know there's many questions in the chat, which just shows that we have a lot of conversation ahead of us, and I'm really excited about that. We will for sure be looking at all of the questions that are in the chat and make sure that we're addressing them in future conversations and adding them to the dialogue. But Nicola Cox, if you would like to unmute.
One moment, just promoting.
Okay, thank you.
Oh. Nicole, I can unmute you. Nicola?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. Again, thanks for this session. It's been very informative. A few questions or concerns that I had, piggybacking on some of the things that were mentioned earlier. When we're looking at the converted buildings, will the buildings have to maintain the exterior dimensions and we're just focused on converting the interior, or will the developers or landowners be able to increase the heights of the buildings? So that's one question. And piggybacking on that, one of the concerns I have in my community, we have a significant amount of warehouse commercial space. And so my concern is that some of these proposals may be deemed to be a financial reward for landowners who have been purposefully warehousing their properties, hoping for rezonings or big projects coming into the area. So what incentives will exist for landowners to effectively and efficiently maintain and support required and needed commercial zonings? And we still will need commercial property in these areas. So that's my second question. And will the developers, landowners, again, be able to go up in height, or do they have to maintain the exterior dimensions for the buildings?
And just to clarify, are you speaking about the carbon neutral? Or are you speaking about
I'm
more
speaking about
district? I'm sorry?
I'm speaking about the affordability, when we're looking to convert buildings for more affordable housing.
Okay. Okay, great. So I think Matt and John, if you both want to contribute to that answer.
Sure, I'll lead off, and Nicola, thank you for both of your questions. On the first one on converted buildings, this initiative is focused on the interior of the spaces, so the kinds of commercial activities that are permitted within a space. If they want to increase their height, and that height increase exceeds what the current zoning of the district allows, they would still have to go through the rezoning process through a ULURP. And so economic opportunity will address the kinds of activities within the space. And this, I think, also can touch on your second question, which is on converting from a commercial use to a kind of warehousing use. Same deal. If they were wanting to increase the density or the height of the buildings, they would have to go through a ULURP separately. But I'll hand things over to John now.
I think you more or less got it, Matt. The rules for conversion in New York City are most useful when you have a building that does not comply in one way or another with the existing zoning. Maybe it's too tall, maybe it's overbuilt or whatever. And those regs enable you nonetheless to adaptively reuse it as residential. And we like that. It's a good thing. In that instance, however, that building's overbuilt or it's too tall. So you could not enlarge it upward. You couldn't enlarge it sideways or anything like that because it's just overbuilt. In the event that you're converting a building that still has height under the zoning or that still has floor area left, then it could, in those instances, enlarge. But it just depends on the relationship of the building to the underlying zoning.
Thank you, John. And to our last person with their hand raised, Gail Accardi.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, Gail.
Well, in the process of doing that, you have hidden my Q&A. Let me see if I can, nope, I can't find it again. I chose to raise my hand because I had asked questions in the chat that I really wanted to get an answer to. But, and you had said at the outset you would be alternating between raised hands and chat, and that didn't actually happen. Anyway, things I wanted to ask about, this may be a little bit out of your purview, but I had read a while back about a hydroelectric initiative which could harness the power of the East River. And I wondered if there was any movement on that whatsoever. Then I also wanted to ask whether the rezoning will also look at the frankly outdated concept of the Midtown Business District. We seem to be doubling down on that and building even more office space when there is vast vacancy in office spaces in Midtown. My fellow speakers have already addressed my concerns about luxury housing, or have addressed luxury housing to a certain extent. Although I would like to emphasize the point that one of my fellows made about inspections and the fact that we discovered during a hurricane that there were a lot of basement apartments that were substandard and people died in them. And will we have a similar situation with some of the ADLs or other things along those lines?
Thank you for your questions, Gail. Nihilus and Matt, I think if you might want to address these questions.
Yeah, I'm happy to take the hydro question. It's a great question. It's an interesting project, and we're closely following the work not just of Con Edison, but also third-party clean energy providers to help supply clean renewable energy to power the city. We don't believe there are any zoning impediments to the development of underwater hydro, but we will keep this in mind moving forward. So thanks for raising it. And this might be my last opportunity, so I just want to compliment the interpreters. Great job with all the technical language. Thanks.
Thank you. And yes, thank you to the ASL interpreters as well.
To address your question on Midtown, I think that we definitely are taking a look as part of our work at city planning on the role of the central business district. We are Dan Garodnick, our chair, is chairing the city's Office Adaptive Reuse Task Force, which is going to and is exploring opportunities to convert office buildings to potential uses like housing, schools, labs, and other kinds of uses. And so those recommendations should be coming out soon. But what I would also say is that many aspects of both zoning for economic opportunity and zoning for housing opportunity would support the recovery of Midtown and the city's other central business districts, and allowing more space to be reused. That's kind of the overarching idea of the initiative for economic opportunity, is to allow spaces to be repurposed and making sure that zoning is not getting in the way of that changes over time as our economy changes. So I thank you for your question, and also thanking everyone for their participation, questions, feedback. Certainly, as we continue on, these are giving us more things to think about, and we are very grateful for your time this evening.
Thank you, Matt. One last question, Michael Case. If you want to unmute yourself.
Hi, my name is Michael Cass. I'm a resident in the East Bronx, and I'm quite excited about many of the changes being proposed, in particular, the lower parking requirements. Now, currently, there are so-called lower density growth management areas found in Staten Island and in Bronx Community Board 10. These areas have additional requirements, such as more parking, and I believe these additional requirements have hurt housing production in these areas, particularly in the Bronx. So my question is, how do the City of Yes proposals interact with the lower density growth management area requirements, particularly in regards to parking? Can we roll back these excessive requirements that were established in these areas? Thank you.
Thank you so much for your question. John or Matt?
Yeah, sure. I could, like I said, our transportation division.
Hold on 1 second. We've lost our ASL.
Okay.
Ah, there we go. 1 second.
Can I go, Tom?
Yes, you can.
Okay, sorry about that. I was waiting for the high sign there. Our transportation division, like I said, is waist deep in developing an analytical framework and doing the analysis around our parking proposals. And I would say that at this point, we're thinking about things very geographically. There are some existing parking geographies out there already, like Manhattan Core, like the transit zone, like LDGMA, that affect parking requirements in various ways. And so we're in the process of seeing how parking works and how housing works within those geographies to see what, if anything, we can do around parking requirements there. But yes, it's definitely a topic. It's part of the analytical framework that we're looking at.
Okay, thank you so much, John. So I know there's still many questions in the chat. Like I mentioned, we've answered many of them, but we will certainly be bringing those back, and we can continue the dialogue. And I just want to say that it's very exciting to see you all here tonight. We've discussed 3 really important topics that are looking at, how do we think about sustainability through carbon neutral? How are we unlocking economic opportunities and jobs? And how are we thinking about our housing options in the future? So this is not the end of the conversation. This is just the beginning. We'll be having another session on October 27th. Which will be the same presentations, and we'll be taking in more questions there. And as we go through this process, there'll be many opportunities to think about these topics with you. We, like our chair mentioned, we are in the beginning stages right now. We are thinking about how we're going to shape these proposals, and it's important that we have these dialogues so that we're shaping them together. If you have further questions in between now and other sessions like these in the future, please remember to send questions to our email, which is cityofyes_. oops, I'm going to get it wrong. Sorry, because it's not in front of me at the moment. It's Tom, do you have the
Ryan, can you bring up the last page?
want to make sure I get it right. So it's DCP City of Yes _DL@planning.nyc.gov. And again, this presentation will be on the Department of City Planning's website, as well as on our YouTube channel to be able to watch this live stream again. Thank you everyone for coming, and we look forward to talking again very soon.